listener production.
Hi, Helen Smith here with you. Welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up on our deep dive, renewable energy overtook coal as the world's leading source of electricity for the first time, with countries like Sri Lanka running on about 50% renewables, with a hope to reach 70% by 2030. But how does Australia stack up, and what does this mean for the future of fossil fuels? That's coming up. First though, let's check the afternoon headlines. It's Thursday, the 9th of October. Mediators say Israel and Hamas have signed off on the first phase of the US proposed Gaza peace plan after US President Donald Trump posted to Truth Social announcing the news. The first phase of the plan calls for a ceasefire and the release of 48 Israeli captives held in Gaza, including 20 who are believed to be alive, and the release of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. Qatar, a key mediator in the ceasefire talks, confirmed the development of the first phase, saying the agreement had been reached on all of the provisions and implementation mechanisms. Meantime, the Australian government has welcomed the signing off, saying it urges all parties to respect the terms of the plan. It comes as New South Wales's top court has made a landmark ruling prohibiting a planned pro-Palestine march to the Sydney Opera House scheduled for this weekend, after authorities raised safety concerns. It's been revealed that Google blocked ads for a Commonwealth-funded STI awareness campaign after labelling it as adult content, lessening its reach and raising costs. Greens leader Larissa Waters told Health Estimates that the campaign being run by the Sexual and Reproductive Health Alliance had been effective, leading more people to book screening tests. Waters explained since Google added STI testing to its list of sensitive topics, it's interfered with Australia's public health objectives and is potentially wasting government funding by rising clicks cost, causing them to go from $5 per click to $17 until the issue is resolved. And an Australian scientist has been awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for their work in the development of metal organic frameworks, which can potentially suck greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere or harvest moisture from desert environments. The award body said the work of Richard Robertson, a lecturer and researcher at the University of Melbourne, along with two other scientists, provided chemists with new opportunities for solving some of the challenges we face. And it comes as the Nobel Peace Prize is set to be announced tomorrow, with US President Donald Trump hoping to take home the win. And we recently looked into Trump's Nobel Peace Prize race, and I'll pop a link for that ep in the show notes. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Dr Reihana Mohideen, an electrical engineer and principal advisor from the University of Melbourne, on how renewable energy not only kept up but outpaced the world's growing appetite for electricity during the first 6 months of 2025. And with just 4 major economies creating nearly 2/3 of global electricity demand, who's leading the charge for renewables? Dr Reihana, this week we've seen the headlines about renewable energy overtaking coal as the world's leading source of electricity for the first time. Is it as straightforward as it sounds?
Well, I think it's a win. I think it's progress, and it needs to be acknowledged as such. But of course, there are still a lot of challenges in terms of meeting the targets in emission reduction and so on. But this is a trend. It needs to be intensified, but there are still certainly challenges ahead.
And what does this mean for the future of renewables and fossil fuels?
Well, I think it indicates the direction in which we really want to accelerate towards the targets that we need to achieve and are slipping by, unfortunately. What essentially happened was that electricity demand, which has been growing from 2024, we saw record demands and so on, but it grew in the first half of 2025 by around 2.6%. And this increase was more than met by increases primarily in solar and to some extent wind generation, which means that for the first time on record, renewable share of global electricity rose while coal's share fell. This is primarily because new systems were put in place, added capacity as we call it, but essentially new solar generation systems were put in place. And this is the primary reason for it. But it was also uneven. We have just four economies, major economies, China, India, the European Union, and the US, that constitute nearly 2/3 of global electricity demand. But while fossil fuel generation fell in China and India, it rose in the European Union and in the US. So it is uneven.
So you mentioned a few there. Which renewables are leading the way?
Well, solar primarily is the big winner in this, covering around 83% of the rise in global electricity demand in the first half of 2025.
Speaking of solar, in Australia, there's been a lot of discussion around the longevity of solar panels. What are some of the concerns there?
Typically, solar panels last 20 to 30 years. After that, their efficiency reduces, and it's not very feasible economically to continue to use them. And so we're in a situation where we're starting to face the problem of waste as solar panels get decommissioned. And this is both small scale, such as rooftop solar, and also large scale projects. So we're starting to face that problem now. And this could become quite a significant problem in the next 2 to 3 years. There are various studies that have been done, including at the University of New South Wales, which projects that waste will reach approximately 685,000 tonnes by 2030, growing to 1.2 million tonnes by 2035. So this is a looming problem that really needs to be addressed.
And how easy is it for solar panels to be recycled?
Well, the technology is there. The technical know-how is there, including the technical know-how to reuse materials and so on. But I think, and the studies point this out as well, it seems that the major problem is logistics to large country, widespread sources of these panels, collecting them, bringing them all together in recycling centers and so on. So there's a logistical problem, but the technology is there to be able to address it.
Going back to renewable energy as a whole, which countries are leading the way?
Certainly China, more structurally, to some extent India, but there are also a lot of smaller countries with very minimal, almost negligible carbon footprints that are rapidly increasing the proportion of renewables in their energy mix and in their power generation systems. Bhutan and Nepal, for example, and these are big hydropower producers, and they're bringing on a large amount of solar very rapidly into their systems. And you've got countries such as Sri Lanka and Maldives, which is a small island nation, extremely vulnerable, where there's a really important, significant energy transition that's going on, introducing solar, getting rid of old fossil fuel systems, with a lot of lessons, I think, for the Pacific island nations in our region. And these are, of course, climate change impacts are an aspect of it, but these are primarily driven by energy security. That is, they need a secure energy supply, problems with the technical aspects of bringing on renewables into the grid, and also for economic development as renewables become cheaper compared to fossil fuels.
And how does Australia stack up in comparison with those countries who are leading the way?
Well, there is some progress in Australia, and I think the policy shift where climate change was recognized as a problem and the need to set targets for renewables and cut back on fossil fuel and so on, I think that has made a difference. Australia still has quite a bit of catching up to do, partly because the policy environment was so unclear for a while there. And policy environment is really important here. We do need a strong policy, and we need a stable policy environment where things aren't chopped and changed as governments come and go. So this has made a difference. And in the latest findings, Australia is one of the top 20 largest solar generators in absolute terms. generating about 20% or more of their electricity from solar in the first 6 months of 2025. So there were a list of countries that were named, and Australia was in that list. However, it still relies heavily on fossil fuels, 65% of its electricity in 2024, with 46% coming from coal. And Australia's emissions per capita were 3 times the global average and the second highest in the G20. So a big carbon footprint. Still a large amount of fossil fuels in electricity mixed in Australia, and much more has to be done, although individual Australian households have really been leading the way in this.
And back in August, the Albanese government's Climate Change Bill 2022 passed, promising an emissions reduction target of 43% from 2005 levels by 2030, and also net zero emissions by 2050. What role would renewable energy play in achieving that goal?
Well, I think renewable energy is absolutely central to achieving that goal. And as we decommission oil power plants, instead of signing up for new fossil fuel power plants, the focus really has to be primarily on renewables. And Australia, with a high level of irradiation, the Central Australian desert, this is a potentially massive solar generation power plant that's sitting there in the center of Australia. It could provide power to all of Southeast Asia and possibly more of Asia as well. So tremendous solar resources sitting there in Central Australia, a tremendous potential to be able to achieve these targets. But again, more has to be done. It really has to be accelerated.
Dr. Reihana, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you very much for having me. Much appreciated.
That was Dr. Reihana Mohideen, an electrical engineer and principal advisor from Just Energy Transitions at the Nozzle Institute with the University of Melbourne. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe wherever you're listening from, and you can find us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And we'll be back in your feed this evening with another briefing episode all about the Beckhams. Until then, I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.